Welcome into 10 Questions with NBC10 Boston. I'm Kwani Lunis. And what better way to start Women's History Month with a woman who knows a little bit about making history and changing the game, literally, when we talk about the National Football League. Dr. Jen Welter, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you doing?
I am doing well. How are you?
I'm doing well also. Thanks for asking.
Absolutely. I think we have the two best months back to back.
Right.
So, we get to share some of the stories that traditionally don't get told as much and are always, exciting to see the breakthrough. So
that's a really good point. I think a lot of times people look at these months and be like, oh, it's so repetitive. You talk about the same thing every year. But to your point, you get to highlight it and continue to dig deeper every year.
And every year I learn something new.
Exactly.
Right? Every year I learn something new and there's more depth, or it even reminds you, why we're fighting. Right? Because you see that these things, that they happened, but you're like, wait, that was just this long ago?
Yeah.
Holy cow, we haven't come that far. So important to have those conversations.
Absolutely. And for you, we just talked about the fact that you are originally from Florida. What was your first time getting into sports? Maybe your earliest memory of deciding that you're going to be a sporty chick?
So I was always really active. My mom would tell you she got her tubes tied after when I was 6 months, and I got a bottle for the first time. And when I discovered I could eat and run, it was over, right? She was like, you would not nurse after that moment. I was like, no, I got stuff to do. And then the earliest memory that my dad really tells, or story that he tells, is there was a fun run at school, and my sister's older. So they had been training to do this fun run together. And the day before, I was like, well, I want to run. And my dad was like, you can run with your friends, but your sister and I have been training. So, you're probably going to be at a different pace because, I'm 2.5 years younger. So he thought I'd be slower. And I was like, okay. So my friend, Kathy Peak, and I just ran. And, we got there and we got done and we're sitting in the stands watching everybody else finish. And, apparently a little bit later, my dad and my sister finished. And they were looking around, they're waiting at the finish line. And they're waiting and they're waiting and everybody's coming in, and now time's passing, and now my dad starts to get worried. He thinks he might be a really bad dad. We were already way done. And he was like, oh, that's what she's going to do. Right. And I was always kind of this high energy, fearless, feisty child.
And with football specifically, that's a sport that you're most well known for, but I know you dabbled in all types of sports. When was your first introduction to football?
Well, I got to, there's a picture of me on the back porch. I don't even know how old I am, this big. So yesterday, because I'm only 5'2", but that, and I have this giant football helmet on. It covers my eyes, and this deflated football, and it's up here. And I apparently used to make my cousins pull the mattresses on the back porch, and I would run at them and they would tackle me. And this was an all-night activity that I would just make them tackle me over and over and over. So there was this deep love for it. But I didn't actually get to play organized football until I played in the Powder Puff game. It was kind of that perfect homecoming moment, right? I was on the homecoming court and I was the captain of the football team on my 18th birthday and scored the only touchdown, right? And we won the game. But, you couldn't really play as a girl growing up. So I kind of tell people, I'm like, I loved it from afar. It was that crush I always hoped would notice me. It just didn't notice me until after I graduated from Boston College. But the secret to my success in football did definitely happen at Boston College because I was a rugby player. And when you learn how to tackle with no pads and no helmet, you certainly have an advantage because not only do you can take everybody down, but I'd like to keep this face intact. I think I did a pretty good job, right? And when you're protecting your face or your head, you don't put it in the middle. It's kind of this hips wrap drop, and then hopefully land on top of their hips like a little baby, and you could take a nap. That's the goal.
So you mentioned playing rugby at Boston College. When you initially decided to pick a university to attend, was that part of the equation when you were deciding what school you were going to go to?
I wish I could tell you I had that much foresight. But I didn't even actually know rugby existed until I saw it. Right. So I saw it at BC. I'm like, wait, what is this? They tackle and it doesn't really make sense because they're going forward, but the ball's going backwards, but they get to tackle. And that's really what I wanted to do. Like, I wanted to tackle. And so I found out about rugby at Boston College. They have a legendary head coach, Ken Daly. And that was it for me. I was all in, and I played all 4 years. I think I was the MVP my senior year and got recruited for the under 23 national team as well.
What other things were you involved in at BC? Rugby and just kidding. It felt like that though, because rugby is both spring and fall. So it's crazy commitment. And we had a really tight group. I also had a job. I taught aerobics all through college because I thought I was beating the system. They were paying me to work out, right? Like I was going to do it anyway. So they might as well pay me. And then I did independent research as well. So I was in CSUM. I was in the School of Business. I had 2 internships my senior year, one with the Boston Sports Journal and another one that we won't talk about. But, no, I'm just kidding. But, that was kind of a standout to me because the Boston Sports Journal at that time was also a BC alumni, Angelica Vallejos Teneo, BC legendary couple. And they had this sports magazine that also started the Flag Football League. And so that's the league that I was playing in. And then she was my boss at teaching at BC aerobics as well. So that figured really prominently. And they always worked with me to help me learn and also make money teaching, and worked around my sports schedule. So it was a great thing. And you mentioned a little bit earlier about the fact that when it comes to being a woman that's interested in playing football, that's not something that you see on a regular basis. Generally, there probably aren't even enough teams for you to play football at its core. So after you graduated and were able to, still find yourself in this space, obviously predominantly male, what was that like for you, knowing that you enjoy this sport, but you're always going to stand out because you're a woman?
Yeah. Well, first, let me give a shout out to the Boston area team, the Boston Renegades. Y'all have one of the best women's football teams in the country, right there in your backyard. So if you haven't checked them out, you need to. Their boss, they just had a really great documentary that came out called Born to Play, which was exciting to me because that was my first team, right? It was the Mass Mutiny at that time, but then became the Boston Militia and then the Boston Renegades. So a long history of great football coming out of Boston for women. So you guys should be very proud, and I hope you all check them out. Because we need that, right? We need that as women. And that's one of the things we don't get as much, right? So for me, being a woman in football, it was like, I have this place that I love and I'm really good at it, but there's not really a future for girls in football. So how do you take this experience, which is what it was, being one of the best in the world? If you don't know, I was blessed to win 4 championships in my career and then go on to play on the first and second U.S. national team, right?
And won 2 gold medals.
Yes, 2 gold medals. But there was no, there were no women coaching in the NFL at that time. There wasn't a place that you could look and say, I want to be her. So I didn't imagine that I could coach. But what I did think is that, if I could take my practical experience being one of the best in the world and marry it with an education that was a master's in sports psychology and then a PhD in psychology, I could be a unique value proposition to the game, right? I'd have it in theory and practice, and most people had one or the other. So I really developed this mentality that I was going to learn as much about the game and the game within the game, right? So that you could speak to all parties. And that served me very well because long before I was coaching, I was actually coaching coaches, believe it or not. I was coaching coaches on coach-athlete relationships and feedback. And yet it had never crossed my mind that I could coach. And I think that's one of the things that is so important to talk about, because people say like, oh, if you can see it, you can be it. But if you can't, it's very hard to say, I'm going to do that, which means you don't have the same dedicated effort to making it happen, right? Or to dream on it and say, I'm going to be that person. I'm going to do all the work and I'm going to do the same work, right? And now that's kind of what's possible. But, you know, I went on to play in men's pro football, and that was where everything changed in terms of opportunities in the game for me. And I would say this because it's so important. That team did not come to me originally with like, you know, a real shot, like she's going to come in and dominate. Yeah. They wanted me to go through a day of training camp with their guys. They did. And as soon as they said it, I was like, oh, okay, wait. So let me get this straight. You want me to like come out and like catch some passes, smile for the camera, get you guys some good pub? And they were like, and I was like, no, that's an insult to me, right? As somebody with 2 gold medals. And if I was any one of your guys on your team, I would absolutely hate it. If you want to do anything with me and your football team, either I do everything they do, step for step, hit for hit, or I do nothing. Mm-hmm. And as soon as those words came out of my mouth, I was like, I might have just gotten myself killed. Right. Because I knew I had spoken it into existence, right? I felt the course of my destiny change. And yet I also felt like it's what we had to do next, right? Mm-hmm. Team USA had already won 2 gold medals. What else do you need from us? You still don't know we're playing, but we are the best in the world. And that's not even ego. Like legitimately, we have the gold medals, we have the track record. And in America's game, American football had yet to make room for women, right? They had yet to see us. How is it America's game still has this perception of women in the kitchen and guys sitting around watching football? Nah, man, I'll order in. I'm watching some football. Right. Give me some wings for delivery. I'm watching the game. Right. And there are so many women who that sport was so polarizing because that was also like the history that was associated with it. Mm-hmm. And that's why so many men, you'll hear them, you know, even when you put out news on women breaking barriers, they're like, oh, can you go get me a sandwich? Excuse me, what? You can't make your own sandwich? Like, you didn't even say, like, let's cook a souffle or something. You said a sandwich, dude, right? Like, let's get a little bit more creative and let's actually realize that if you love this game so much, why would you not want your daughter to watch it with you? Why would you not want your wife to be like in it with you as opposed to it being a point of contention? Because she's saying, why are you watching more football? Right. You would want her to watch. She's saying, why are they running a 3-4 right now? I really need a little bit more pass rush out of you guys. You know, like, why is it that this sport has that particularly divisive element to it? And so stepping into the men's game for me was literally worth dying for. And I knew very well that I might not get up. And yet I didn't feel like I could say no. And it was interesting because all of a sudden, when I got tackled by men, it was the #1 story in the country. Nobody even gave a damn about me until that moment. They didn't even know I existed. And yet the beauty of it was at that point, they didn't even really know I existed. They knew a woman was doing this. And then people started to want to know how women could get to the point where they were doing this. And it started to be a bigger conversation. That to me is the most important thing, right? Being the catalyst to start the conversation, because then other people will do it. Other people will see it. They'll go watch the games. They'll talk about it. You know, even when they're hating on you, they're still talking about you, right? And before that, we were the best kept secret in sports. We would just say we didn't want to be a secret anymore, right? So it's so interesting how it takes those big moments and those big things to shift destiny, right? And the men that I played with taught me so much. Right? Most people thought, it couldn't possibly work. It wouldn't work. And yet those guys were amazing. Like, they stepped up for me in ways. And, you know, they would joke. They'd be like, you know, you're like our $1 million baby. I'd be like, yo, I want my movie to end better than that. Don't put that on me. Like, I am not being ended in this, and that's on you. Y'all got a block for me, right? But they'd also say stuff like, man, this is real life G.I. Jane. Like, I never imagined that I would have a woman that was my teammate, right? Like, and that we didn't feel like it was an outsider. Like, they actually took it as a point of pride, and they stood up for me. They were protectors. And it was the relationships we formed in that situation that changed men's pro football in terms of coaching. Because when a new head coach, Wendell Davis, came in the following season, he said, who is this girl that all my guys love? And they said, Coach, that's your running back. And he told me later, he's like, Jen, I knew everything about you, but I never imagined that the guys would love you like that you would be like real teammates. I mean, we were at an event. We weren't even on the field when Wendell saw this, and the guys basically saw me and, picked me up and tossed me around like a football, because relative to me, I'm one, that's easy. I'm 5'2". And it just struck him. And after that, he sat me down and he starts grilling me on football, what was good with the team, what wasn't. And, I'm the type person who I'll tell you, right? Like, these are my guys. Here's what was good. Here's what was tough. Here's where they struggled. And he's grilling me at football, like right here. He's a close talker. He will not let you off. And I'm like, oh, you want to go about the game? Let's go. Right? Like, what? I have played, I've been in football for 20 years. Yes, we can talk ball. You can always teach me something, but we can talk. And at the end of it, he called me the next day and said, all my defensive coordinator and I could talk about on our way home is how you have to coach this football team. And I said, no. And he goes, what do you mean no? And I said, no, girls don't coach football. Women don't coach football. And I don't coach football. You want to throw me right into men's pro football? Like, no. And I tell people that because so often we look at people who have done big things or broken barriers and think they always had a perfect vision or perfect confidence. And I certainly did not. I turned it down. I actually hung up the phone on him. And the next day he called me back and told me about myself. He said, do you remember how I told you not a lot of guys were going to give you this opportunity and you were taking this job? I said, yeah. He said, good, I took it for you. You're coaching for me. And by the way, you can't quit. Otherwise, the entire narrative surrounding women coaching in men's pro football will be, we had a girl once and she quit.
Yikes.
Yeah. But you know what? It's so important sometimes that someone else sees something in us before we even see it in ourselves. Absolutely. Right? It was not, let's look at Kamala Harris right now. Right? As a woman, I had not seen that I could be vice president. As a woman of color, I'm sure it was the same or even deeper, right? And now it's a possibility. Whether or not it's your path is different, but we don't see it as someplace that we could not exist anymore, right? There are girls all over the country, I guarantee it, who are like, yeah, of course you could be vice president. Right? Of course you could. Why couldn't you? Because they'll grow up seeing it. And that creates just so many possibilities. And it takes brave people who are willing to make that decision and do it, because it's not going to be popular with everybody. People always say, oh, well, of course, Bruce Arians should have done that. And I go, really? Because what if it had gone badly? What if something had gone wrong? Then everybody would have said, oh, yeah, Bruce Arians, man, coach of the year, offensive coordinator with the Steelers. But do you remember the time he hired that woman and hired that female, right? Because you're the one of one. When you're first, you are the one of one. And it's about you, but it's really not about you, right? It is you. But the conversations, if you listen, are, could a woman, would guys in the NFL take coaching from a woman, right? And the sample size is one. If you do it well, it'll be 2, 3, 4, 5, right? And they'll get to make their own case and do it their own way. But that first one, the pressure is, I always say it's the opposite opportunity and responsibility of the first to ensure you're not the last, to ensure you didn't do anything that would close the door for all of the women who would want to come after you. And that's anybody setting the standard. That's woman, that's a person of color, that's whatever is different, whatever they're not used to seeing, and whatever some people may not want to see, because not everybody wants to see change, right? We know this. Not everybody is a champion for change. It's unfortunate, but it's true. So when you are the first, you are by nature divisive. Your existence is divisive because people don't know if they want it. There are a lot of people who won't, and they're going to talk about it regardless. But you are the one that they're going to look at and set the precedent.
It sounds like you had a little bit of imposter syndrome when you finally did get that coaching role. So where would you say was the point where you got to the point where you were confident and knew that you belonged in the world of coaching?
Well, first of all, I had to do a little bit of impostering to get the next step. So, it's funny. I think who we are in our mind versus how other people see us is often worlds apart, right? Mm-hmm. And I think everyone has a bit of imposter syndrome when they step up into a new situation, and that's okay. Right? It's okay. You just do the work and you learn, right? So even when I was playing on the Revolution, the guys, if I'd see stuff and I wasn't in the game, like maybe I was on practice squad for some of the games, which meant I was just watching. And I'd be like, hey, okay, next time they're trying, like, do this, they're trying to do this to you. And the guys used to joke and say I was like a little coach on the sidelines. This was something they already said before I was actually a coach. And I'm like, yeah, and it's amazing. I get to take all of this good knowledge, right? Gold medal knowledge out of this 5'2" frame and put it in 6'7" It's amazing, right? It's like I'm a puppeteer, right?
It's powerful.
It's powerful, right? And they all used to say, like, when I started coaching, they all used to say, because we used to do X-Men, the guys used to say, oh, what X-Men are we? And I walked up on it one day and I was like, oh, okay, what X-Men am I? And they were like, oh, that's easy. And I was like, really? And they say, yeah, you totally Dr. Jean Grey. You got that raspy voice. It's got mind control over all of us. And we all know the Phoenix is in there and ain't none of us want to meet her, right? And so it was interesting because we're in this situation where you really do get to grow into it. And arena football is tough, right? It's tough situations. Everybody has other jobs. Everybody has other things. Life is really, getting in the way. And yet for me, that was normal. From women's football, that's how we always existed. So the problems that the guys were facing were oftentimes things that we'd gone through. And so that didn't feel like a stress or a strain to me. That felt part of what you do when you're teammates, right? And so I figured out really quickly that a lot of the things did translate and I was better at it than maybe I thought. And so how I ended up going to the NFL, interestingly enough, was because another woman broke a barrier. And that woman's Sarah Thomas. So when Sarah Thomas was hired as the first full-time ref in NFL history, a reporter, gotta love those who ask good questions, asked Bruce Arians if he could ever see a woman coaching in the National Football League. And his answer was, the second a woman proves that she can make these guys better, she'll be hired. Well, I was already coaching in men's pro football. So I talked to my head coach about it. And my head coach said, well, we should call Bruce. Can you get me his number? Don't y'all have a little black book or something? Right? Aren't y'all boys like, can't you just, no? Cool. Because, the closest I'd ever been to an NFL sidelines at that point was the nosebleed section. But, I can get Bruce's number.
Easy.
Right. No problem. So he kind of challenged me, like, if you can get me his number, I would love to talk to him about you. And so I called the Arizona Cardinals. I was at that time calling on behalf of the head coach of the Texas Revolution, and my head coach wanted to talk to their head coach because he had heard about what Bruce had said about a woman coaching in the NFL. And though it was not the NFL, there was already a woman coaching in men's pro football, and my coach thought their coach needed to know about it. So I called the Cardinals on behalf of myself, as if I wasn't myself. And I left a message on behalf of my head coach about myself. And, you know, I'm not going to lie. I talked to his assistant, and, you know, Wes was like, oh, I think BA would really want to take this call. You know, it's so cool. But I thought I had gotten blown off. I did not think, oh, I just magically opened this door. Like, why is this guy? I mean, and maybe his assistant even knew it was me. Maybe I don't know. But I was really proud of myself that I had called the Cardinals, right? That I was brave enough to pick up the phone, because here it was before that, I never, ever would have picked up the phone, right? And it turns out a couple weeks later, Bruce Arians called, you know, my head coach back and said, tell me about this girl, and really asked all the questions. You know, did the guys listen? Could she read the guy's eyes? He loved that I had a PhD in psychology. Really thought that would be an asset with Bruce, knowing that he's a player's coach, and eventually invited me out to OTAs and, you know, made that change. And I think every time you step up a level, you probably have like that moment where it's like, and then it can get okay, right? Like for me, it was always the sound of like football pads. I'm like, oh, I'm home, right? Like when I walked out to OTAs, I kind of was like, and then it was like the sounds are the same.
Yeah.
Right? You'd hear the pads crunching and the whistles blowing and, you know, coaches barking, and it was like, oh, okay, it's football. And it was like, it's okay. Right. And I think you have to get yourself there to realize that you know more than you think you know, and you're closer than maybe you imagined that you were. And when I got there, there were several moments that really stood out. I remember when Sean Witherspoon gave me a nickname, and he was like, you know, he was like, what do I call you? It's Dr. Coach, you know, what do I say? And I, you know, and I said something, and he was like, Dr. J, I'm gonna call you Dr. J. And I was like, oh, because I look so much like the original. We've got the height. And you know, they loved it. And as soon as they had given me a nickname, BA was like, oh, she's fine. They gave her a nickname, right? She's good. And every time I heard one of the players say, oh, coach, we watched your game film, I knew it was okay, because that's the ultimate game recognizes game.
It is, yeah.
They were really excited to be a part of history. They were really proud that they were like, this is the history books, man. Like, can I get a cameo in the movie one day? Like, that's what they always say, coach, can you get this face on the big screen? I'm like, y'all are insane. And sometimes they would say, coach, I think it's bigger for us than it is you. Like, I don't even know if you realize, because we all grew up in this and there were never women.
Yeah. And
I was like, yeah, you might be right. Right. Like, and we had such great conversations and relationships. And, you know, I saw Calais Campbell the other day. Well, it feels like the other day at the Pro Bowl last year. And as soon as I saw him, I was like, Calais. And he looked, he's like, coach. Like, he knew my voice.
Yeah.
Right? I was like, Coach Jen, I was just talking about you the other day. I was so happy to see you. And he said, you know, Coach, I had to tell some people the other day how proud I was to see the progress and the women getting opportunities in football now. But that we had the original, like that we started that. And I had to give him a reminder and give you your props, Coach, because, you know, how special that was. And I think having been able to shift culture through the game that we love so much, it's a really powerful bond.
What would you say was the biggest adjustment you had to make when you transitioned to the NFL and coaching on that level?
There's a few. The first one is the playbook is no lie like this.
Yeah.
Right? Like the playbook is the Bible. So I just want y'all to read this with me. And that's not one thing per page. That's like, depending on the layout of the sheet, it's either 10 or 12 iterations and adjustments based on formation. So it really is how much there is to learn. It's also not like the movies, right? Like, in the movies, they still do 2-a-days and, it's mostly ground and pound. With the CBA, you can't do 2-a-days anymore. That's not actually a thing, right? Like you do a walkthrough practice first. And so that's very intellectual, right? It's making sure that how your responsibility shifts based on formational differences and matching, walking through the plays, making sure that you've got the stunts down, responsibilities, all of that. And so that is a completely cerebral practice. It's just, it's like, going through the playbook, but doing it with motion. Yeah. And then, the amount of tape, like I used to joke and tell people, you watch tape of watching tape. And literally it's not watching tape, but you're watching tape of like even a walkthrough to make sure that we're in the right place. Then you make those adjustments and then you do it full speed and you go back to it. So I think those are things that people have this idea of what it's like, and it's just all physical all the time. And there's no game more mental than football. Well, maybe golf, but in terms of having to rely on each other, right? Like you have to know all the contingencies, and your responses are based on other people who are also trying to mess you up. I always describe it as full contact chess, right? Football is full contact chess, and it has 11 players who are required to work together in a perfectly choreographed dance for any one play to be successful, right? And our choreography is contingent on the other person, and you don't know what they're going to do. Right. It's not like we've worked this out and you and I are going to make this look good. Right. Like it's not like a fight scene where I'm like, okay, and you're going to turn your head and you're going to come back. No, we don't get that. Like there's a million different things you could do on any one play, and we have to be prepared to do what we need to do against it. So I think that's really cool. And that's the on the field stuff that was tough. And I think, the thing that was really new to me was people watching and caring what I had to say and what I was doing. And that was while in the league and then even after. And, I think I've had a lot of people say that they were impressed on how I used my platform, and I'd start laughing. Right. I'm like, I've been this person for years and years and years. I've been doing these things. I've been pushing the envelope, speaking for change. You just didn't know. You didn't know I existed. So the person was already solidified. The platform thankfully came up, and it's a good thing too, because I, again, went from relative anonymity to all of the sudden being introduced in an NFL press conference. Mm-hmm. And I remember just looking and being like, what are all these people doing here? Right? Like, and I also knew that it was important to when you are put into those situations that you have a platform to be a person who's using that opportunity for a bigger picture. It's not me being this exception to all the rules. It's me being one of a bigger wave of women who have been in the trenches with me for a very long time, putting in work. And I just happened to be willing to step up to the challenge that came my way, right? And to say yes to it and know that it was because all of those women, because of the fights we had went through and the love that we have for each other, that to remember that I was representing all of them, and to let them drive me and push me on the days that I might not feel like I had it in myself.
And fast forwarding to now, obviously you've had all this education, all this coaching, but now you're giving back in a different way, not just to women, but to children. You have a series, Critter Fitter. What was the inspiration behind that series, that book series?
Oh, COVID. So when I was getting my master's in sports psychology, I became really fascinated with like play therapy and drawing therapy as ways to facilitate conversations around tough subjects. Mm-hmm. And I noticed that there was not the interconnectivity between like play and drawing therapy and actually sports psychology. And that felt like a miss to me, right? We're playing sports and we're assuming that it's going to give us leadership lessons. Why are we not being intentional about the lessons that kids should pull from sports, or good lessons, and, you know, helping them talk about things if it wasn't good? And so I really became fascinated of the medium of like children's storytelling to be able to help them work through some of this tough stuff. Never had a chance to really use it, but always like was fascinated by it. Articles would come out, I would read them. Books came out, I would read them, knowing that I think children deserve us being intentional. They deserve us helping them find voice. They deserve us creating safe spaces or conversation, or giving them the tools, because they like rules. They actually like to know what's going on. And if you tell them, they will be the best ones about it. So when COVID happened, I was driving across country. I had bought a place in LA at the end of February. So perfect timing to move across country by yourself with your Chihuahua. I'm just saying, timing is everything. And I got to LA the day that it shut down. So just to give you an idea. But as I'm driving across country and, you know, kids are already being taken out of classrooms and they're already inside, I was getting calls from friends of mine that were like, my kid's going crazy. I don't know what I'm going to do. And I realized that a lot of the fitness stuff was really for big kids, right? The adults, but not as much for the young ones. So I had taught kids fitness, you know, since I was in high school, and I start rhyming this poem into my phone about Busy Bee, and, you know, how he's gonna, you know, you can come work out with me, and, you know, we're gonna like visit the owl, and we're gonna flap our wings together and do all this stuff. And I literally rhymed this whole poem story into my phone, and I sent it to my friend Brooke, and she's like, this is really good. I said, oh, you think? And she's like, no, I know, I own a branding agency. This is really good. And I was like, oh, that's cool. And I ended up, you know, finishing writing that book. And she used to be a creative director. So she kind of knocked off that part of her and illustrated it, right? Because her son, Danny, fell in love with the idea. Right? Danny was like, what about the book? I like the book. Yeah. I like the inchworm, you know, because we inchworm, we do all these different things. And it's about a 20-minute workout with a warm up and cool down. So the kids learn the structure, and there's a little mini story. And so that was it at first. And then the pandemic went on longer. And you know, me being in lockdown, like, I am thankful that I'm creative. Otherwise, I would have been bouncing off walls, because I didn't even have furniture for the first 40 days. It was stuck in pandemic purgatory for longer than Noah was on the ark. I was like, you know, it's me and a mattress on the floor, and I better be creative, right? And so it was just me and my Chihuahua Tyson, and I would hug him. And then I wrote When a Ladybug Can't Hug. And it was how to connect through the heart while staying 6 feet apart. Ended up writing a bunch of different character backstories. And then one day, I heard a line, and it was like, wearing a mask says, I love you. And I was like, oh, duh, this is what I need to write. Yeah. And so then I wrote the third book, which it came out as the third book. It's probably about the 11th written, but, and that one is the one that's gotten the most traction, because it goes through all of the CDC guidelines, gives the mask a hero story, helps parents and educators with a call to action on wearing the mask, and, you know, gives kids the guidance of what's going on, right? And takes this really tough subject and makes it easy, right? Because kids were struggling with things like, oh, it's, the virus sounded like Godzilla. I don't know about you, but it sounded like COVID was coming at your house, right? So how could we make the kids understand that this is scary? Yes, but it's also manageable. And so it was lines like, the virus can't just walk down the street. It doesn't have feet. Just like mail can only be delivered by a snail, clearly. If no one spreads it, the virus will fail, right? So to be very simple and very visual and take these things and make them very manageable, right? And give the kids like, hey, this is why we're washing our hands. It kills COVID. Not soap. No. Oh my gosh, not soap. Right? Or you wear a mask because it wants to get in here, right? I want to sneak in your nose and your face is my target place. Like things that they could joke about, but get and understand. Right. It allows them to be a proactive, positive part of the solution. And that book has by far been our biggest seller. And then the last one that we came out with is one of my favorites. It's The Resilience, place where we all need to get to. And so this is our Ladybug. Ladybug is like our emotion character. And then this is Sergeant. And this one is an ant-filled adventure. Literally ants all through it with characters like Brilliant, who teaches about things like antibodies. And so the characters, it really plays on the ant word and makes it so that, again, you can put it all together in a way that's manageable and teach the kids like how we can get through this. Because I don't know about you, I can resist an adult, right? I want to hug you. Please know I want to hug you, but you might have cooties, so I'm not going to. Yeah. But I've worked with kids for so long, and if that kid runs up to my legs and hugs me, I'm gonna hug him back. Yeah. So we need them to understand what is going on, because the truth is that our society pivots around our children, and the women who are generally the ones who are affected when they're not in school, right? So our kids are still generally in that selfish phase, which we hopefully grow out of, that the world revolves around us. Yeah. But if anybody knows a kid whose parents have, for example, suffered from divorce, what do they say? They say, I'll do better. They say, Mommy, I'll make my bed. I'll do better, because they feel like they pick up the emotion and the tension, and they'll take it on themselves that this problem was something that they caused. And it's important to have tools that teach them that you're not being punished, right? I'm not washing your hands all of the sudden 8 times a day because, you're dirty, right? Like, or there's something wrong with you, but it's what's going on in the world. And I'm not covering your face because you're a bad guy, because typically if we look at pre-COVID, what a mask would have been, it would have been a bank robber, or, somebody who's doing something really bad or sneaky, right? So the trust factor is there. You're not stuck at home because your friends don't like you anymore. You're here because we're keeping everybody safe. And so they're so smart. Kids are so smart. They feel it even when they can't verbalize it. And so the series was really created to help facilitate those conversations. And the brilliance of, how simply it's illustrated is that kids can pick up a pen and they can draw our ants, right? Our ants are literally a doodle. And yet, it's backwards, but this is anticipate, who thought of every need, and this is accelerant, who pushed their speed. So you could teach them how to tell a story and do some of these things. And if they're struggling with something, if a book's approachable enough, you can say like, I need a ladybug hug. Have you ever felt like you need a ladybug hug? And they're like, Do you, Ladybug sends social distance hugs to her friends because she misses them. Have you ever felt like that? And they say, because characters are safe. And that's something that we can all remember. Kids aren't necessarily yet at that age skilled in expressing emotion about themselves, and some of it is complicated and too close. But fiction, right, or a character allows them to separate enough that they could tell a story via another character, and that feels safer. So the things that they maybe want to talk about or have their aunts say and do, or Ladybug do, are actually the things that feel really close. And so it becomes a way that you can have those conversations with your kids.
You just got a TED Talk psychology lesson, which I appreciated. So thank you for that. For those that missed it, Critter Fitter is out now, right? They can access the book.
You can get them on Amazon. It is drop shipped on Prime, baby.
There we go. Thank you so much, Dr. Jen Welter, for giving 10 questions with NBC10 Boston some time today.
I appreciate it. You know, I'm always at home in Boston.
You know,
I can't wait till we can travel again, because there are a few places more beautiful than Boston in the fall.